Good Erev Shabbos, everyone. This week we have Parshas Mikeitz, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Chanukah. Parshas Mikeitz, we find Yosef, who was imprisoned for a life sentence, miraculously is taken from his incarceration, brought before Paro to interpret dreams. And here Yosef, who was a young man, all of 30 years old, who is standing before the most powerful figure in the face of the earth. And when he is told by Paro that I heard that you can interpret dreams, knowing that his entire fate and future is within the hands of this Pharaoh, Yosef responds and says, it is not up to me, but rather it is God who will send through me a message unto Paro. It's remarkable. Yosef, one would think that he would be intimidated. Certainly if we'd be brought before a prime minister or president, our fate, if we be taken in the Soviet Union, and this is the fate of our entire lives, we would say, well, try to do what we can, and we'll work very hard. And Yosef stands as a man, as if he's talking to someone, an ordinary person. And he tells him, it's not me. I am not the one. God will send you, as if he's becoming Paro's educator, his teacher. God will send you. And we find it in his entire dialogue with Paro, which was absolutely respectful. But we don't see that Yosef recoiled or expressed any type of a reference to being overwhelmed by the majesty, but rather he says to Paro, this is what your dream means, and this is what God is instructing you to do. A remarkable faith that he had, which was the cause of this remarkable transformation and meteoric rise from the dungeons and despair to becoming the most powerful figure on the face of the earth. The Talmud in the tractate of Shabbos says, my Chanukah, what is Chanukah? And there it says, Chanukah, we know that when the Greeks were driven out of the temple in Jerusalem and they came into the temple and all of the oil, the pure oil was defiled. And they found one little jar of oil with the inscription of the Kohen Gadol on it. It remained pure and unadulterated, but it could only last for one night. And they said, it will take us at least a week until we can properly process the pure oil. They decided, let's do it. And we know it lasted for the entire 8 days. That's the miracle of Chanukah. And we all light our menorahs and we say the bracha. But yet what is extremely troubling is that in our prayers, when we daven Shmona Esrei and when we do benching, we say Al Hanisim. And there we express our gratitude unto God for the wondrous miracles of our victory over the Syrian Greeks, the Yavanim, in which he handed over many into the hands of a few, skilled warriors into the hands of the pure and the learned, in which he took the cruel and he handed them into the hands of the innocent. And then we came into God's temple and we purified it and we lit the menorah, and our sages determined that this would be a time of expressing lahodos lahalel, to express our gratitude and praise unto God. In this expression of our praise and gratitude to God, there's no mention of this miracle of the oil burning beyond its capacity. And yet when the Talmud discusses what is Chanukah, it doesn't even speak about the great victories. It talks about the miracle of the oil. How do we reconcile this? We find that by Purim, which preceded Chanukah by over 150 years, we find that there was a threat of extermination and genocide against the Jewish people. And we don't see that they took swords in their hands to rise up and to fight their enemies, but rather they donned sackcloth and they gathered together in prayer and they repented. And indeed, because this is the Jewish way, as Yitzchak, when he gave his bracha, the blessings to Yaakov, he said, HaKol Kol Yaakov, the voice, therein lies the power of Yaakov and the children of Israel. The voice of prayer, the voice of Torah learning within their voices. That's the spiritual sword. But when he spoke to Esav, he said, Al charbecha tichya. You, Esav, you will live by the blade of your sword. Lifting a sword, going to war, this is the way of Esav. And therefore Mordechai, Esther, and the Jews said, it's not for us to lift swords, but rather we lift up our eyes unto you, O God, you who created the heavens and the earth. It is to you that we utilize our powerful tool of prayer. We find similarly when Dinah was taken into captivity and she was rescued by her brothers Shimon and Levi, and they went and they took a sword and they slaughtered all who stood in their way of rescuing their kidnapped sister. And when they returned, they were criticized by Yaakov. Yaakov saying, although you were miraculously victorious, nevertheless, lifting up the sword, that's the way of Esav. That's not our way. When the time came for the Hanukkah, when the time came in which we found ourselves being oppressed by the Misyavnim, the Syrian Greeks, who were not interested in oppression. They weren't interested. There was no genocide. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted a spiritual extermination. They wanted to destroy our faith. They wanted cause us to forget our Torah and to transgress God's statutes. They said, we want you to live and be just like us. Let's have one Hellenistic world. Keep some of your customs. Eat your gefilte fish. That's fine. But as far as Torah law, as far as your statutes, that's not necessary. Use your mind, use science, use logic. That's the Greek way. That's how the Hellenizers were bringing their new philosophy. And they were coming to destroy, remove the Torah from the Jewish people is destroying our souls. And therefore Yehuda Maccabi and others said, we must lift a sword. For it's not just our bodies that are being threatened, it's our souls. When our souls are being threatened, we must use every opportunity. If our souls are destroyed, it's not a question of this world, it's a question of all eternity, the world to come. But there were those who were critical. And they said, Yehuda, that's not what Mordechai and Esther did. Yeah, but Mordechai and Esther was only our physical bodies being threatened. But they didn't lift the sword because it's not the Jewish way. When Shimon and Levi lifted the sword, Yaakov criticized them, even if they were successful. This is the way of Esav. Klal Yisrael doesn't lift the tools of Esav. Nevertheless, the times called for extraordinary responses. And as we know, the few went to war against the many, the unskilled against great warriors, the pure against the impure, the innocent against the cruel. And God delivered our enemies in our hands. And despite this remarkable victory, there were still those who said it wasn't correct. We lifted the sword of Esav, just as Shimon and Levi lifted the sword. They were victorious too, and they were criticized by Yaakov. And there were many critics of Yehuda and his brothers. What we did was wrong. It's not for us to take the sword and to become like Esau. And Klal Yisrael was waiting for a sign. And as I heard from Rabbi Avigdor Miller of blessed memory, he said, you know what that sign was? God gave a sign that the decision to lift up a sword was indeed correct over here. And it was different than Shimon and Levi. It was different than Purim. There we find no threat to our spiritual existence. Hanukkah, our spiritual existence, we're talking of existential, we're talking about the souls of Klal Yisrael for all eternity. Now it's appropriate to lift a sword like Esau. What sign did God give? That's the question in the Talmud. My Hanukkah, the Talmud's not asking what's Hanukkah about. Well, we don't know what Hanukkah is about. There's no Talmudic question what's Purim about, what's Pesach about. Of course we know what it's about. The question of the Talmud is, what was the divine omen that the decision to lift the sword was correct? The miracle of the oil. Why would God perform this miracle? He wanted us to survive. But why would he perform this miracle, defy his laws of nature that he created, if what we did was through an inappropriate means? The answer is that my Hanukkah, you want to know what Hanukkah is? Hanukkah is the incredible miracle of the oil burning for 8 days to show the divine approval of lifting a sword. And how do we answer the criticism that, but this is Esav's tool? The answer is, this sword defines who Esav is. The sword that was lifted by Hanukkah does not define us, but rather we find that Rivka, in her prophetic wisdom, said to her son Yaakov, Yaakov, I want you to masquerade and impersonate Esav so you will receive the blessings of your father. Yaakov would deceive his father, impersonate Esav. That's the antithesis of everything that Yaakov represents, truth. And Rivka said, Yaakov, my son, listen to my voice. For I am telling you, there will be a time in which you will need to impersonate your brother. And that's what Yehuda Maccabee and the Jews did at Hanukkah. Whereas Esav is defined by the sword, we were just masquerading and impersonating him. That's not what defines us. On the contrary, we temporarily lifted the sword as Yaakov temporarily presented himself as Esav. We did this temporarily so that we could seize the eternal Torah of God and our relationship with our Father in heaven. We impersonated Esav so that we can maintain the voice of Yaakov. That's what the miracle of the oil was demonstrating. So if we ask, what is Hanukkah about? Hanukkah is about the remarkable victories of those who were willing to martyr themselves in order to live as faithful, loyal Torah Jews rather than to be Hellenized. And if you want to know what's the sign that that decision was correct, lifting a sword, that's the miracle of the oil. So we light the menorah because the menorah is indeed the miracle that shows that, yes, there are times we must impersonate Esav, but it's nothing more than a masquerade. It's not who we are. Who are we? Those who are willing to give our lives, if necessary, to see that our children and future generations will be able to live with God's Torah as loyal, faithful Jews who uphold the traditions and uphold all the laws that God has blessed us with. That's what Hanukkah is. That's the Al Hanisim in which we offer our gratitude and our praise. This was Yosef. Yosef maintained that remarkable faith, for he knew no matter what transpired in his life, being imprisoned, sentenced to life in a dungeon, being brought before this Pharaoh, it's all a masquerade. And the only reality is the truth of the will and the existence of God. Stay safe and stay healthy and stay Jewish. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a Freilich and Chanukah.